Good morning and welcome to Fuller Life Concepts Workshop. Today we're going to be presenting intimate partner violence and sexual violence on college campuses. So glad to have you join us. We are starting a workshop series that will be free to the community. I'm Kim Fuller, the Chief Executive Officer, Fuller Life Concepts, and I'm happy to present a workshop by Lindsay Shine. So Lindsay is a Rutgers University Masters of Social Work graduate. She studied domestic violence and received a certificate. She's also facilitated many domestic violence work groups in support groups in her time as she's been a therapist. She also has a certificate around the violence against women and children. So we're really happy to have her here with us and sharing her expertise with our clients and now with you. Lindsay.
Hi, everybody. So thank you so much for the introduction, Kim. My name is Lindsay Shine. I'm an associate clinical social worker here with Fuller Life Concepts. Just thank you so much for the introduction. And just a fun, interesting fact about myself is that I am an avid crocheter, actually. I really enjoy crocheting and making gifts, including different kinds of attire and also stuffed animals for my friends and family. Okay, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just some introductory information about who we are. Fuller Life Concepts' mission is to remove barriers to high quality mental health and wellness services and improves the lives of women and children in their relationship, both with self and others. So currently we're offering telehealth sessions for individual, family, and couples. We focus on anxiety and depression. All of our staff is specially trained to work with children and adolescents. Currently, we are accepting private pay, victims of crime, and some insurances as well. We do provide free consultations, and I'll be sharing some information as to how to go about that towards the end of our workshop today. So firstly, this workshop is based on intimate partner violences, specifically sexual assault on college campuses. So we need to define what sexual assault is. In this context, we're defining sexual assault as any sexual activity initiated by an individual that occurs without consent of the individual to whom the sexual activity is directed, and or by force or coercion, including non-consensual sexual contact and non-consensual sexual intercourse. So the key word there is basically non-consensual. We're going to kind of continuously talk about consent throughout this workshop as well. So some keys to sexual assault and what it is and how we're defining it. It's considered something to be occurring by lack of consent to the person assaulted. It occurs by force, incapacitation, or coercion. Incapacitation, we're talking here about people who are potentially intoxicated under the influence of some kind of substance, including alcohol. Coercion would be if someone is feeling pressured or coerced in some way or another into participating in the sexual activity. It includes non-consensual sexual contact and non-consensual sexual intercourse. So contact or intercourse in this definition. So some of these statistics are going to be quite alarming and staggering, but it's important for us to kind of shed light on this information so that we know how significantly this is actually impacting a lot of folks in the community. Among undergraduate students, 26.4% of females and 6.8% of males experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, or incapacitation. Again, incapacitation is when we're talking about somebody being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. This is actually not just an issue that impacts cisgendered females and males. This also impacts folks in the LGBTQ plus community as well, with pretty high statistics. So according to the information that we found for this presentation, 23.1% of transgender, genderqueer, or non-conforming folks in the college community have been sexually assaulted. College women are twice as likely to be sexually assaulted than robbed. I just kind of want to take a moment here and reflect on how staggering that particular information can be. College students are most likely to be victimized as freshmen, which is referred to as the freshman effect. We're going to talk about that more in specific detail as to why that occurs when we get on a little further down the line. So here's some more statistics that we found when we were putting together this workshop. 50% of college sexual assaults include use of alcohol or other substances. This is by perpetrator, victim, or both. Women who have a history of being abused by a partner are more likely to experience forced sexual assault since entering college. We're going to go ahead and talk about that a little bit more in depth later as well as to why that occurs. Most college students are actually victimized by someone that they know. So when we tend to think about sexual assault, we get this image in our head about a stranger, somebody that we don't know, but this is actually proven not to be true. And most students do not end up reporting their sexual assault. So this would indicate that the statistics and information that we have is not 100% accurate, because it's likely that there are significantly more sexual assaults and sexual violence being perpetrated than we know of. Why does sexual assault occur on campus? So as we're talking about this, this might be a question that's sort of popping into your head. In order to really answer this question, we have to sort of conceptualize college and think about what it represents, both good and bad. So college is a time where people are starting to sort of individuate. They're searching for their individuality. They're figuring out their likes, their dislikes, who they are as a person. They're developing their identity. This might encompass some risky behaviors, whether that be because, we're trying new things out or being peer pressured. Risky behaviors could include experimentation with drugs and alcohol, something that maybe folks have never necessarily engaged in with such frequency before. A lot of parties are centered around alcohol and drugs, especially in a college campus situation and setting. And so these things are easily accessible, which would make it more likely for, that sort of experimentation to occur. There's also the feeling of being independent without consequences. So a lot of times people who are going to college are potentially moving away from family members, moving away from parents, and they get a sense of, really, again, searching for that identity, but also trying new things, not being held accountable because they are searching for this sort of independence. And experienced older populations could potentially impact that as well, because there's sort of this mingling that's happening with older folks and newer freshmen as well. So I did mention prior a couple of minutes ago that sexual assault is underreported pretty significantly as far as what we are aware of at this time. This could be due to lack of a trusted support network. So when folks are, moving away to college, or whether they're commuting, or whether they have actually moved and are staying in a university setting, they might be developing a support network and not necessarily have a trusted support at that time. There's also this huge fear of victim blaming. So one of the things that I really want to make sure that we do throughout the course of this workshop is really highly indicate multiple times that it is never the victim's fault if anything like this does occur. Unfortunately, in our society, we tend to blame the victim. We tend to think, what were they wearing? What kinds of things were they saying? What were they doing? And instead of blaming the perpetrator who committed the act, we oftentimes see that the victim is blamed and shamed, oftentimes publicly, for what has occurred to them. Okay, so we are currently still in the middle of a pandemic, right? And COVID-19 started almost 2 years ago at this point on a global scale, and it has apparently exacerbated a lot of things in regards to sexual assault, in particular on college campuses. So especially during when we were all under what we were referring to as quarantine. COVID-19 particularly made it so that people had a fear of getting in trouble for throwing parties, because there was at a time still heavy fines being imposed for public gatherings of any sort if there were over a certain number of people. And if we reported an incident during that period of time, there was a potential for getting in trouble for throwing a party in the first place. Being away from home causes students to feel isolated, and especially during this pandemic, people are feeling isolated already as it is. So this is just being exacerbated. And again, going back to that lack of social support network, these things kind of all create a perfect storm. College campuses, especially when a lot of them are closed. I know a lot of them are opening up right now. But however, during this, when we were really under quarantine, meant slower investigations just due to funding allocations and people being actually physically present there. Another thing that could have impacted and is impacting sort of sexual assault statistics is intimate partner violence could be potentially increasing because intimate partners were isolating together, which could mean tensions would rise pretty significantly. So we're going to talk about the red zone. I'm just kind of curious to see if anybody has heard about the red zone at this point, or just kind of think to yourself if this is something that you're familiar with. If not, we're going to sort of break it down here. But essentially, the red zone is the most dangerous time of year for sexual assault. It runs from orientation, which would be the start of the school year, to Thanksgiving break. So when students are separated from their traditional support network, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, when they're moving away from friends and family and other supports that they might have had, they might not necessarily have quality connections on campus at that point, and therefore it would be a lot more difficult to actually receive services or support whatever was going on. This also includes the freshman effect, as I alluded to earlier, which is when younger freshman students, not always necessarily 18-year-old students, but there's a high prevalence of very young students arriving on campus, and they are not aware of resources. They don't know necessarily where to go. They might be preyed upon by others. And more than 50% of sexual assault on campus is thought to occur at this particular time. Again, I do want to really highlight and emphasize that we do not get reports of all sexual assault that has occurred. So this statistic is probably actually lower than the reality of the situation. So Delaney is was a college freshman. She was about 19 years old and moved away from her partner, her long-term partner from high school. So she's a first-year college student. She was living at home prior to moving away to college. Again, she was engaged in a long-term relationship with her partner from high school. And unfortunately, she did have a group of peers that threw a party for just celebrating the start of the school year. And she had a friend at the time who actually did sexually assault her while she was engaging in underage drinking. At this point, there was kind of a lot of factors that were in play as to why she didn't report the incident. One of those being she felt guilt and shame because she was in a relationship with another partner. And she knew this peer that sexually assaulted her. So she knew this person. She, again, was underage drinking. She was out at a party with who she thought was a friend. And unfortunately, just based upon that kind of shame and blame that society places upon a person and that she unfortunately internalized, she did not report. And she also was not aware at the time, based on the fact that she was an incoming freshman, of who to actually report something like that to. Okay, so we're going to talk about general sexual safety. We really want the focus to be on proactivity as opposed to reactivity. If we can do things to sort of help prevent against these incidences, hopefully we can start to see the statistics go down. One of those things would be clearly defined boundaries. So in order to sort of establish boundaries, we first have to know what our needs and wants are. Once we can identify what our needs and wants are, then we can sort of set a boundary and be okay with the implementation of that boundary with other people. I also want to, again, really kind of emphasize that it's okay to change your mind. If you are engaging in an activity with someone and you change your mind at any point, you set your boundary, that boundary should be adhered to by the other individual participating. Clearly asking and giving consent. Consent is something we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes, but asking that other person that you're engaging with and really giving your consent, really giving a solid, enthusiastic yes to whatever it is that you're participating in. Trusting your instincts is another big one. If you're feeling uncomfortable in a situation, if you're feeling kind of off or feeling, like I have these weird kind of experiences, maybe physically, maybe emotionally, that's probably a good indication that the situation that you're in is not safe. Again, I really, really, really want to highlight that it is never your fault if you are victimized. It is never the victim's fault, regardless of the situation that occurred. So how do we address the red zone? So we've talked about the red zone. We defined what it is. We've really kind of gotten into it. We saw the statistics. We saw that 50% of sexual assaults on college campus are thought to occur at this time. So what do we do about it? Knowledge and education. I really believe that the more information that we can spread out there, knowledge is power. That's one of the reasons why we're actually doing this workshop today as well, is so that we can help provide knowledge, education, and support for others. Proactive education for all populations. So again, we really want to focus on proactivity, not reactivity. We want to offer an immediate support network. So we want staff and other peers to be trained or at least be aware of how to assist a victim in the situation. We want to really focus on informing incoming freshmen of dangers, sort of implementation of boundaries, how they can learn how to say no, what consent is, also how to sort of help other people. This would be bystander prevention training. We want to enforce real consequences. So instead of just, saying this person gets sort of off scot-free, we really want to be able to implement real consequences, such as potentially that person getting expelled from a school situation, and also have legal ramifications as well. Okay. So ideas for sexual safety education. This lovely graphic is taken from Planned Parenthood, which has lots of excellent information in regards to sexual safety and consent. There is a sort of acronym, FRIES, which encompasses consent. So consent is freely given. Again, going back to the coercion, it is not coerced. It is not somebody pressuring you repeatedly over and over and over again to say yes until you finally break down. It is freely given. It is reversible. So that means that if you consent to one particular activity, it does not mean you are going ahead and consenting to another activity in the future. It does not mean just because you agree to have sex with someone one time that you will continuously have sexual contact with them. And the same goes for different sexual acts as well. It is informed. It is enthusiastic. Again, if you are engaging in sexual activity with someone and they say something to the effect of, sure, okay, to me, that doesn't sound enthusiastic. I think enthusiastic means a yes, a cheerful yes, something that potentially the other person is excited about. And again, it is specific to the acts that are being performed. So ask, listen, respect. If someone says no, we need to respect their boundary. They do not want to engage in that activity with you at that particular moment. So it's really critical to respect them. Bystander training is something that we also need to start implementing, because when people are in trouble, we need to be able to sort of have that sense of obligation to help them out of whatever their situation is. So some ideas for sexual safety education. Again, is really bystander prevention training, which I think we're going to go ahead and talk about in the next slide. Bystander-focused prevention, educating students to be supportive bystanders, has shown positive results. So first, it comes to awareness, knowing the situation, knowing your surroundings, being aware of where you are at any given time and who you are with. This one is really important, sense of responsibility. So if we have this sense of obligation and a sense of responsibility to help friends and even strangers, it will help us in potentially preventing some kind of, incident from occurring. Perception of norms. If it feels wrong, it's probably wrong. It probably is wrong. So just kind of an example, if you see a situation in which one individual is sort of leaning into another person at a party, and that other person is, kind of hunched into themselves, maybe they're pulling away, maybe they have their head turned, that's probably an indication that maybe that other person is very uncomfortable with the situation. And so that would be a good time to just kind of check it and check the situation, and maybe come in, say something to the effect of, hey, are you okay? Do you need some help? That if that feels a little bit strong for you, maybe just, hey, how's it going? Everything okay here? Confidence is key. Feeling confident in yourself and the situation makes intervention easier. If we feel, again, this sense of obligation and duty to help protect others, we can start to develop that confidence. Safety. A bystander intervening needs to know when to call upon others or law enforcement for help. So this one, I tend to think of a situation in which is similar to a medical emergency. So if, for example, I'm at a gym and I see someone lifting weights and they fall down to the ground and they are not breathing, I will run over to that person. I will check and see if that person is breathing. I will check to see if I can feel a pulse. And then I will look to someone else and I will say, you directly, I will point at them and say, you call 911. So it's very, very similar to actually intervening with a medical emergency as well. So at this point, you may have been wondering, how does this all sort of tie into intimate partner violence? We've been talking about sexual safety, college campuses, sexual assault statistics. We've been talking about bystander prevention training. IPV is kind of going to tie all this together. So intimate partner violence involves physical, sexual, and or psychological violence between current or former intimate partners. It leads to physical and mental health issues that may include low self-esteem, physical health issues, and potentially even suicide attempts. Often victims of intimate partner violence do not seek help at higher rates than other victims of sexual abuse, meaning if a sexual abuse incident does occur within a relationship, typically people are less likely to report that. So IPV on college campuses, at least 1 in 5 college students has endured IPV, which again includes physical, psychological, and or sexual abuse. Enduring intimate partner violence during college sets up an abuse sort of filled life, because it's typical to see folks who are in abusive relationships that kind of continue that cycle and getting into other abuse filled relationships later on down the line. Staying in the relationship might be caused by a lot of different factors. Sharing of a friend group. This one is really difficult because especially in a situation in which, let's say, you have moved away from home, you are a freshman on a college campus, you are developing a new support network there, you start dating a partner, and then potentially, most likely, you are also involved with that partner's peer group. So if you are sharing a friend group, you would probably be a lot less likely to want to report any kind of abuse that would occur because of the sort of social ramifications that go along with that. There's a fear of retribution, and again, a lack of a support network, which kind of ties into what I was just talking about. So there's a lot here on the power and control wheel. This is some more information about intimate partner violence. We could, spend a ton of time. I could talk about this forever, but we are basically going to just kind of do a quick little overview of the power and control wheel, which encompasses physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. So we found throughout, looking in articles and finding research studies that about 1 in 4 women have, and nearly 1 in 10 men have experienced sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime, and reported some form of IPV related impact. It usually starts out in seemingly innocuous ways, but will potentially lead to more obviously violent acts. So the reason for this is because typically in most scenarios, if an abusive person starts off with very serious forms of aggression, it is less likely that an individual would maintain a relationship with that person. However, if they start off with slow manipulation, sort of gaslighting tactics, maybe potentially lying about things, kind of following them around or telling them what they can and can't do, what they can and can't wear, those things are a little bit less perceived typically as dangerous things. So if we get a lot of those types of activities and behaviors, then potentially later down the line, it'll be a lot more difficult once the relationship has progressed to actually leave the relationship. I want to highlight using intimidation. This is actually a really, really common form of violence. So making a person afraid by looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying their property. This could eventually lead to things like abusing pets or displaying weapons. So it's not necessarily physically attacking the person, it's intimidating them. And what the implied statement is, if somebody is destroying your property, the implication could be potentially, this could be you. I could be doing this to you, but I'm not. And instead I'm taking it out on, your phone or a wall, etc. Coercion and threats. This is a big one as well. So making or carrying out threats to do something to hurt the other person. This could be threatening to leave. This could be threatening to commit suicide. All of these things are kind of used to kind of manipulate and threaten the person into maintaining the relationship and staying in the relationship. Emotional abuse is a big one as well. So this would be putting them down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, making them think that they're crazy. So this is kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier when I was mentioning gaslighting. So making a person feel like what they think or what they feel is somehow wrong or somehow crazy, or they lose their sense of reality because they're being abused emotionally. This could also be humiliating someone, especially in front of friends, especially in front of peers. So really making someone feel embarrassed for their thoughts or feelings or behaviors, making a person feel guilty as well. Isolation is really, really commonly seen further down the line in abusive relationships, and it also can start really early on as well. So this would be controlling what they do, what they see, and who they talk to. It could come in the form of something seemingly romantic as well. It could be, something to the effect of, I don't like it when other people look at you, or it makes me feel jealous. So it's really like putting that person's jealousy onto the victim and putting that onto them and making it their responsibility. Limiting outside involvement, again, using jealousy to justify actions. So what we tend to see in survivors and victims of abuse is that over time, they become more and more isolated from family and friends. This could even result in them having to leave their job at a certain point if it gets really escalated to that extent. And what tends to happen is that when they get to the point of such serious isolation in that abusive relationship, the only person that they have to really go to or turn to for anything is actually the abuser. So it makes it really hard to sort of seek support or get help, because over time, the sort of isolation has really kind of impacted them in such a negative way that they don't have support anywhere else. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. This would be making light of the abuse. So this would be somebody is emotionally abusing their partner and calling them names and making fun of them and humiliating them in public and putting them down. And then when they are being held accountable for their actions, they would say, again, maybe the gaslighting tactic, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I didn't do that on purpose, or I was just having a bad day, et cetera, et cetera. There's always an excuse. Maybe even saying that the abuse didn't happen. Maybe even saying, what are you talking about? I never said that to you. I never hit you. I never threw that across the room, whatever the case may be. Another one is blame shifting. So this would be basically saying, yes, I did do that. However, it was your fault. And again, I know I've said this multiple times throughout the course of this workshop, but I really think it's very critical for everyone to recognize and acknowledge that abuse is never the fault of the survivor or victim. Using economic abuse is sort of the last one that I'd like to highlight on this particular power and control wheel. That would be preventing them from getting or keeping a job, making them actually ask for money. This could be giving them an allowance, right? So only allowing them a certain amount of money and not having access to it otherwise. And then another one would be not letting them know or have access to family income, or not letting them know about the financial status of the family. Okay, we can go to the next one. All right. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the cycle of violence. Basically, the cycle of violence always includes a sort of honeymoon phase. And as the violence progresses and gets more and more escalated, the honeymoon phase can disappear from the cycle entirely. This will be when the abuser apologizes, tries to make up for their actions. Again, they might actually blame the victim for their behaviors, or they could completely ignore or deny that the abuse happened. This is usually when everything is going really well in their relationship. Everything feels really good. Maybe that abuser is sort of love bombing you, which is when they are telling you all sorts of wonderful things about yourself and how incredible you are and how much they love you and how much they care for you. They might be buying you gifts. They might be taking you on nice vacations. Unfortunately, after this leads to sort of a tension phase, which is where the victim might feel like something is wrong. I might feel, oh, something is going on. I'm walking on eggshells. I'm afraid of making them angry. There might be threats, intimidation, a sense of fear for that person, guilt, and potentially unpredictable behavior. This inevitably leads to a violent episode. This could be an explosion. This could be physical. It could be sexual. It could be emotional, verbal, psychological, etc. But this is when the violence actually occurs. So some sort of violent behavior, like what we had just described with the power and control wheel, could be emotional, physical, financial, or sexual abuse. So preventing intimate partner violence on campus, it's important for us to understand the power and control wheel, and important for us to understand the cycle of violence, how it occurs and why it occurs. So we're going to teach individuals, hopefully, if we start implementing this sort of proactive approach, to recognize the cycle of violence. We should tell students how to report. So the easier it is, the better it is. If they can have more people to report to, it'll be much more successful in terms of actually reducing the statistics that we're seeing. So throughout the course of this workshop, we've learned quite a few things. I really would like to take this opportunity to provide some resources for folks who might not know where to go, and they might not know where to seek support or report to. So the first one would be RAIN's website, which is 800, or their phone number, which is 800-656-HOPE. That is also including a crisis line as well. your college or university should have a Title IX office, which is where you can report any sexual assault to. The Sexual Violence Resource Center, nsvrc.org. There's also the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, which is vawnet.org. I do want to also highlight that both of these websites, if you do go to them, they have an emergency exit button located on their website. So if potentially you are actually around a violent partner at that time and you're not safe to be searching on the websites, they do have a way that you can exit immediately, and it brings up another website. If you are in immediate danger, please call 911. Please call in emergency services if you are seeking safety from an immediate situation. So this is sort of where Fuller Life comes in. We are offering free consultations with clinical staff. We at this time are able to provide free and confidential consultation to you or someone you know who might have been victimized. So you can call this number here, 323-334-0064, or please send an email to fullerlifeconcepts@gmail.com. So again, this is a free confidential consultation with clinical staff. And if you're ready to sort of begin your healing journey today, this would be an excellent opportunity to do so. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and provide some sources if you're interested in looking up where we got all of our information from. There's quite a few different websites listed here. There's lots of information online available, especially from the CDC. That's where a lot of our statistics came from. And at this point, I believe we're going to go ahead and open it up to any questions and answers that you may have all had throughout the course of our presentation.
Hi, Lindsay. I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
The first one is, why is there a connection between a child victim and a later assault that could happen?
So domestic violence and intimate partner violence in particular is really pervasive. And unfortunately, what we see is that throughout the course of someone's lifetime, if they are abused earlier on, it sort of becomes almost normalized for that victim or survivor, for that individual. And they maybe have such guilt and shame in that they kind of will be more likely to enter an abusive relationship later on, maybe because they haven't healed from that, because they have been traumatized. And again, the normalization that occurs. So they would have potentially more likelihood of entering an abusive relationship later on because they have kind of internalized maybe that they deserved it, somehow it's a normal behavior, somehow it's acceptable. So they would be more likely to enter an abusive relationship later on down the line.
You brought up a potential client named like Delaney.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, like, when she was like after assaulted, what should she do next? Like, where should she have started?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. For Delaney's situation, again, she was in a long-term relationship and she was assaulted by a peer who she thought was a friend of hers. So she probably had, well, I know she had a lot of, guilt and shame associated with that. At that point, it would have been really good for her to potentially call RAIN's phone number for their crisis hotline so that she could get additional resources and potentially more community-based resources for her. She also could have gone to her campus Title IX office and made a report as well if she, was able and willing at that time to sort of involve authority figures.
Thank you for that. I do have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about her going to an office on campus.
Mm-hmm.
What can we as support staff do different to make it easier for someone to come and talk to us about that?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, it's really important that we educate all staff about the prevalence of sexual assault and violence on campuses so that everybody is aware. I really believe, again, in taking a proactive versus a reactive approach, which is, I think, sort of what you're talking about here. So one thing that would be really important is to kind of allow victims or survivors the knowledge that the space is safe for them to share, really allowing them to know that you have sort of the bandwidth and the ability to listen to them, validate them, and then offer resources as necessary if they want to make a report or if they want to move forward with actually reporting to appropriate authorities, or whether or not they want to receive support services such as support groups, or maybe just even contacting the crisis line. Alrighty, so it doesn't look like we have any more questions at this time. I would like to kind of provide our information here. Fuller Life Concepts, again, you can reach us at 323-334-0064. Our website is www.fullerlifeconcepts.com. And you can also reach us via email at fullerlifeconcepts@gmail.com. Thank you again.